when I was playing quarterback, I mean, I don't know what it was. I just felt miserable going out there. And it was something that I never really experienced before. And it's just one of those things where it's like I just had a hard time sleeping at night just because it's like I was like, well, we have to wake up at practice tomorrow. And it just became this like crutch for me to go out and have to perform at a high level. And if not, it's like you're gonna face scrutiny. And I was, I had my expectations set way too high, and it kind of crippled me in my play at quarterback. But making that switch, that ultimately just freed me up because there's no expectations. It's like, oh, let's see what he can do. So I ended up playing a lot more confidently and more freely as a result of that.
Gosh, that's a great question. I don't know if I've ever been asked that. Like, what is the it factor?
The It Factory is back for season 2. Last season, we explored what the It Factory is, who has it, and how they got it. This season, we still seek to answer the same questions, but with a new cast of characters. We take the helmet off some of the new faces in the Conference of Champions, and some familiar faces as well. Players, coaches, and experts will explore what it is that sets them up for success on Saturdays. I'm Yogi Roth, and welcome back to the It Factory. Okay, welcome back, or welcome to the It Factory. I'm your host, Yogi Roth. We are presented by Zayo, and it's hard to believe where we are in the season right now. Hopefully you're enjoying these conversations. And when you have a show like this, sometimes you set up in the preseason who you hope to have on the show. Well, for 2 years, our guest today has been on that list. So it is an honor today that we get to welcome in Jack Colletto. Yes, that Jack Colletto, Mr. Everything, all academic, all Pac-12, Paul Horning Award watch list, William Campbell Award semifinalist. There's a lot of things to describe you with, man, but overall, you're one of my favorite guys to talk to. So with that, Jack Colletto, welcome to the show.
Great. Thanks for having me. You said 2 years?
Yeah.
On
Yeah,
the
it's our
list?
second year of the show, and you've been on the list.
All right, man. I'll take that.
Yeah, well, it was solidified when you came on the Pac-12 Network studio show a year ago.
I guess
It was your big TV debut. It's pretty cool.
that was my debut. I thought that was my one and done deal right there. I thought I was gonna hang it up after that.
No,
But
we couldn't do that. I enjoyed my time with you over the summer to take people behind the curtain a little bit. I went up to your campus and I got to host an event with a bunch of dignitaries and donors and players. And you were one of those players, but you're also the co-host. So I look back on that, I'm like, man, Jack can handle the mic, man. So I want to begin there. Like, is there anything in your life when you look back on your childhood, like, did things come easy to you? Or were you always a guy that's like had to work extremely hard at whatever task was in front of you?
so funny that you say that because let me see. Like back when I was a child, just being the youngest and the fact that like my brother was older, he was 16 months older. So there's just kind of that age where it's like we kind of had the same friends growing up and stuff like that. And we're kind of always in competition with each other. And that always ended up in a lot of fights, but it kind of turned me into this feisty little kid growing up. And I mean, I've always kind of had that drive and ambition as a result of that. And especially, my dad is another big figure in my life who's instilled that in me. But I mean, growing up, that's just kind of how I've always been, was like driven and always wanted to do something great and believed I could do something great. But I mean, the person I am now, it's just funny that if I were to look at myself now 4 or 5 years ago, it's a completely different person.
Oh, how so?
Honestly, because I never really talked much, and especially adjusting to new places, I always hated change. And my mom would always tell me that. It's like she always had to let me know what was going on. If like anything kind of came up spontaneous or out of the blue, it's like I'd always lose my mind, especially as a kid. And gosh, it was really, I kind of hit this turning point because it's like my whole life I've just been hard headed about football. And I was like, you know what, no matter what happens, I'll be able to find a way to make this work. And it was always kind of like running through the wall mentality. And really, it's when you get to Oregon State and then you get a lot of people who pretty much are just as talented as you, and the competition's a lot higher and the room for error is a lot smaller. I just had a point where it's like I just kept hitting a wall. And it was like on the field, but I definitely believe it was because of stuff and how I spent my time off the field. not to say it was like it was what I did off the field was bad. It's just I wasn't really focusing on developing every single area and aspect of my life. And it just kind of, when I made that switch to linebacker, that's what kind of opened up this avenue for me to learn and explore and realize that I need to take care of other areas and aspects of my life in order to continue to develop and pursue my football dreams.
Yeah, that's profound.
It
That's a
really is,
pro.
but it's like it takes so it was such a long, like messy process to be able to realize that and get to that point.
Yeah. Well, that's life.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes
Oh
long
yeah.
and messy. When you said something, I think that was pretty poignant about like you have the ability when you were, throughout a lot of your life where you would run through the wall, like you just make it happen. Do you have a moment when you look back on even your childhood where you're like, that's when that thing became my way of dealing with challenges, with just kind of plowing through it?
Um, I mean, ultimately, just because I transferred schools my freshman year, again, it was to the rival school, which was Kingston High School, and all. I mean, I knew a few people, but I still had to make new friends, and it just was kind of that same mindset where it's like, it's like I make friends with the football. So it's like you go out and you make plays, and then people begin to accept you, and that kind of became the way it was. And then I ended up transferring to Camas High School, and it kind of ended up becoming the same thing, although it did take a little bit longer, just because I basically knew nobody there. But just being able to go out on the field and it's like, oh, this guy can actually play, and then you tend to make friends that way. And having those experiences is what kind of created that perception that I had, that's like, okay, well, it's like just go and make plays and ball out, and then you'll be able to make your friends through sports and through that avenue. But then the funny thing is, when I got to Oregon State, it wasn't necessarily the case, because it's like there was still some growing up I had to do, especially with playing the game and developing as a player. And so it wasn't as immediate. And that's where I had to start to look towards other avenues.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I can remember this vividly. I was like 6. I tell my 7-year-old, our 7-year-old, this all the time. I was always the last guy picked. And I can remember after school, that's school year, so that's like kindergarten, first grade, I dedicated my whole summer. I'm like, I'm never gonna be the last guy picked. And
Mm-hmm.
became the individual that was like, okay, whatever obstacles in front of me, like, let's go. I'm gonna run through it. And how old are you now? You 22, right? 23?
Gosh, how old am I? Yeah, I'm 23. I'm almost 24 now.
Okay, you're almost 24. So I'm 41, and every year I pick a word of the year, like a theme for my life. And it wasn't until 40 that I picked a word that I think you're describing right now. And the word is flow. And if you said, Yogi, what do you meditate on every day when I wake up? The phrase is uh, move with intent, but go with the flow. And I wonder how that lands on you, having just described your collegial experience and as well as what happened in high school of run through a wall, run through a wall. Damn, that ain't really working anymore.
Mm-hmm. It's so funny that you say that, because I can relate to it so much, especially recently with what I know now. Because obviously, with that mindset of running through the wall, you want to, it's really much just all out effort. It's like, it's like if I go harder, I can last longer than this other person. It's like ultimately win. But mentally, I do believe that there's a breaking point for that philosophy. And I mean, if you think about it this way, is if you take a sprinter, for example, if they really try to run 110%, they're never really going to run as fast as they possibly can. And especially when training to like get fast, because I mean, I was really slow when I first got moved to Camas, and then my uncle's one ended up developing my speed. His saying was always, go as fast as you can with the least amount of effort. And it's that idea that I've started to implement into my life later on in my my college career, which actually definitely helped me. Is you want to be able to put out a lot of effort, but at the same time there has to be a certain amount of ease that goes into that effort to be able to sustain it and perform at a high level. It pretty much boils down to, you want to play hard enough to perform at a high level, but be relaxed enough to enjoy the experience. And that's something that Coach Smith also preaches on for a team as well.
Wow, enjoy the experience. So I have this phrase, it's called the wonder switch. And I think wonderment, right, is tied to imagination. So think back to when you were at JC and you're like, okay, I got a chance to go to Oregon State, and you came on your visit and you looked around Reser. What went through your mind?
I was like, it honestly felt surreal. I was like, oh my gosh. And then, not to help it, my very first game at Ohio State, 100,000 people, you're like, this is like a video game right now. But and then it's funny because now I look at it now, you walk out to the stadium and you look around, you're like, oh, it's a big stadium. But it's just kind of like, it's whatever.
Right.
Just because
right.
you've had that experience and you've played in those scenarios and those situations before.
Okay, so what you just described, walking into Reser, walking into Ohio State's arena, that's wonderment. So when you got there and you started to look around, what did you imagine?
Gosh, honestly, I imagine like all the players that came through and all the games that took place on the field and what went down and the history of pretty much what went down in all the stadiums and being able to see that on TV and the fact that I was there right now. It's like
Yeah.
I'm here right now in the middle of all of that.
Coming up on the It Factory.
When you come in here as a freshman in college, and the only thing you focus on developing and getting better at is football, you will have a miserable experience. If you leave the building after your 5th year or whenever you decide to leave as the same person you came in, your experience will not be enjoyable. You have to be able to not only expand your mind when it comes to football, but what comes along with that is expanding your mind as an individual. And I believe that window, when you leave your parents' house and you go into college and you're on your own, I believe that window, 18 to 22, 18 to 23, however long you're in college, that's your window to really truly solidify your identity and figure out who you really are as an individual.
So that's extremely powerful. As I referenced, I call it the wonder switch, where your
Mhm.
wonderment is lit up, your imagination goes. And that's a beautiful moment. I think a lot of times for athletes, because your imagination's always on. So if you're worrying, it's the biggest misuse of your imagination. Are we
Mhm.
going to win today? Am I going to play today? Or is my family in the stands today? Am I going to fumble it today? And then all of a sudden the wonderment, you don't even realize it gets dimmed and dimmed and dimmed, and then it's off. And I say that because there's a lot of athletes that I talk to in locker rooms where I present the wonder switch, that concept. Say, how many have had it off? Via recruiting, via DMs, via fans, via your own performance, via your own self-talk, whatever it is. And 90%, if not 100% of locker rooms say, yeah, at one point, my wonder switch was turned off. And you said the word joy. So I ask you that, like, how do you maintain joy being around this game for as long as you have and seeing all the things that you have?
I'm trying to. I mean, ultimately, it's my end purpose and my why is why I still enjoy doing what I'm doing. But also on game day, just being able to feed off the energy of the crowd and everything going around. Obviously, like that stuff still gets me fired up. But the deeper answer for that, I'd say, would be ultimately my why and why I really chose to play football and pursue football.
So the natural follow-up, what is that?
What is the why? My biggest why is my dad, I'd say. Because growing up with my parents being divorced, he always had to go half the year to work up in Alaska, so I didn't really get to see him that much. But having football as an avenue to build a relationship with him, and we still talk all the time, and it's always about football. This game has been able to give me that relationship with my father that I otherwise wouldn't really have had.
What's your dad's name?
Bert.
Tell me about him.
Bert Colletto. To sum up him as an individual, I'd honestly have to say probably one of the hardest working guys I've known. And if you think about it, 60 years old, still working in construction. And he's a project manager now, but he always says it's like never make people do what you wouldn't do yourself. And he takes that idea out to the workplace every day, and he's always out there working. Like he can't just stand there and give orders. He always has to have his hands on and always out doing stuff. And then on top of that, doing that every 5 days a week at 6 years old, he still goes out, mows the lawn, does all the housework, keeps everything clean. I mean, he's just a workhorse. And it's so funny because sometimes it's like I sit here and I'm like, gosh, my body hurts. But then it's like, it gives me perspective because then I think about it. It's like, oh, I mean, he's probably feeling 10 times worse than me right now. So, I mean, what I'm going through probably isn't that bad. So just being able to see that and him as a role model in regards to that aspect of life, it's really given me a lot of perspective.
Yeah. What are conversations between the two of you like?
I mean, I will say, I mean, there's never been a time where he's never not stood in my corner. Never been a time. And being able to have somebody like that, and it's like, that's really what we all talk about. It's always been talking about the dream. It's one day, it's like making it to the NFL and being prevalent in the NFL. And it's always been about that goal. And I think that's a goal he's shared with me ever since I was a little kid. And I said I wanted to do that.
Wow. Wow. Is there something that like you don't know about your dad that you hope to find out?
Gosh. I mean, from what he's willing to like, I mean, what he's told me and like him as a kid, I've seen pictures and I mean, I didn't really obviously know how he was like growing up. I mean, he said he was a troublemaker and there were stories of him being a troublemaker and stuff like that. But I don't know. I've never really been curious about that per se. I'm more just kind of accepted how he is for what he is.
Yeah. You know, years ago, my dad was diagnosed when I was a player. I was younger than you when I was in college. We didn't have a COVID year. But when I was a player, my dad was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And I didn't manage it well or at all. Fast forward to like a decade later, it hits me all like a wave. And I'm like, oh my God. You know, he, had beaten it, but there was still like, I was like, I have so many unanswered questions. And it hit me. I was living in a little apartment in Venice Beach. And I remember saying to myself, I'm not going to learn more about him at the celebration of his life. It's not going to happen. And I called him up and I said, hey, I'm coming home. I flew home. And I said, hey, Dad, let's go for a walk. And he said, sure, where do you want to go? He's thinking we go around the block. And I gave him a plane ticket. And we went and walked what is known as the Camino de Santiago, which is like one of the most famous pilgrimages or hikes or walks in the world. It's like a couple weeks. You do it. And on that hike, every day we went through a different decade of his life. And I say that because since that movie released and has since it's done well, I've talked to a lot of sons and fathers of I'm like, there's just so much we don't know. And I think as a dad now, like, I'm not going to tell my kids about playing college football or coaching college football. I'm not going to tell them about broadcasting. Like, I'm not going to put that on them. I kind of hope they ask one day, like if they do. And I just loved hearing about that relationship. And I didn't think this conversation would go anywhere where we've gone so far, but I love that for you and him. And I just asked, like, if you have those questions, ask.
Gosh, I've never even thought of it that way. The way you said that. I mean, I might just need to be book a plane ticket.
Let's go, dude. Tickets. I'm in.
But yeah, I mean, the way you put that, it's like, I mean, you never really understand it until you kind of go through that experience and there's a finite amount of time left. And it's really not something that, I mean, I've probably thought of it a little bit just because of my grandpa passing away and when I was in elementary school and seeing that. But I mean, it's probably something that I should end up doing, but yeah.
Yeah. The reason I bring it up is because I love what you've said. I've been taking notes here. Like, he's a workhorse. You're a workhorse. He talked about how like he's always been in your corner. When I talk to your teammates, they say, yeah, Jack's always in my corner. You play on offense, defense, 4 of the 6 special teams, sometimes 5, pending field goal block if you're out there or not. Like, I just think there's beautiful symmetry between how you've shared what Bird is like and what you are doing as a 23, almost 24-year-old young man who's graduated with a mechanical engineering degree on top of being one of the top players in the country.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely, yeah. I mean, it just, a lot of it comes from his philosophy and his mindset going to work. I mean,
Yeah.
just being the blue collar guy. And he's told me, it's like, it doesn't matter where you play. You play on a cow pasture. It's like, you can play anywhere. It's like, it doesn't matter. Just get on the field. Just do what you got to do to get on the field.
So what's it been like to do that? Because it's not like you went from tight end to linebacker hybrid role. Like you went from quarterback, bro. Like I know the photo. Like I have the photo of you on your visit to Oregon State being like, gonna go play quarterback. I mean, the transition is not typical. If anything, it's atypical. How have you embraced all this? Because it's become a persona to a degree as well.
I think the best part about it is the fact that it kind of just happened naturally and it wasn't really forced. And it kind of goes back to the whole thing between effort and ease. And especially just the whole aspect of being able to build yourself, not only as a brand, but an individual. And a lot of times where I see people tend to make mistakes is they tend to try and force things. But if you really think about how long of a process this was to get to where I'm at image wise and where I'm at playing wise, I mean, it was what, 3-4 year process to develop into something like this, where it's like now you can do both things, and even the openness for the coaches to, be willing to accept that idea. Because it's so easy for any of the coaches to be like, no, we're not doing that. No, we can't do that. He can't play both ways. And just stick him on one side. But the fact that they were able to explore that option, that's what makes it even more incredible, and just how all the pieces kind of fell together and fell in line. And for me, it's insane.
Still to come on the It Factory.
I never really want to be in a spot where I don't feel like I have the power to create my own opportunity. And so ultimately I believe that's like I need to do something to be able to create myself a platform where I can have the power to create my opportunity. I mean, because it's like I was so, of course, like I said, running through a wall about playing quarterback. I even turned down FCS offers to go to JUCO just so I could pursue that dream. And it just kind of met at a breaking point. And really, another big mentor for me when I transferred to Camas High School was my uncle, and was the one who got me fast. And I mean, he taught me how to play safety when I was in high school as well. And so I sat and talked with him when the quarterback thing wasn't going well, and he was just like, "Look, it's like your options. I mean, your opportunity is very limited, and ultimately it's not really in your control, because it's like you've done what you've done, but ultimately something has to happen for you to get your opportunity." And when I sat that back and thought about it, it's like I never really want to be in a spot where I don't feel like I have the power to create my own opportunity. And so ultimately I believe that's like I need to do something to be able to create myself a platform where I can have the power to create my opportunity. And so that's when he's like, you could switch to linebacker. And it's like, you could work with me and we could get things dialed in and install the defense. And I thought about it for a few days, and I went and I talked to Smith about it, and the look he gave on his face, he's like, what in the heck? But he sat down, he's like, you know what, let's see how this goes. Because he had no idea. And then that summer, so I was able to put on, I think, 10, 15 pounds in like a 2-month span and develop into a linebacker. And I ended up redshirting that year, but I mean, still, it's like I installed the entire defense before the fall camp. So then I was prepared and ready to go. And he's like, oh yeah, you're actually, he's making plays and he's doing stuff. I think the greatest part about that was the fact that, I mean, when I was playing quarterback, I mean, I don't know what it was. I just felt miserable going out there. And it was something that I never really experienced before. And it's just one of those things where it's like, I just had a hard time sleeping at night, just because I was like, well, we have to wake up at practice tomorrow. And it just became this like crutch for me to go out and have to perform at a high level. And if not, it's like, you're going to face scrutiny. And I had my expectations set way too high, and it kind of crippled me in my play at quarterback. But making that switch that ultimately just freed me up because there's no expectations. It's like, oh, let's see what he can do. So I ended up playing a lot more confidently and more freely as a result of that.
It sounded like you play with some joy.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. But I know that was a long-winded answer, but it's just kind of crazy how everything kind of unfolded and developed.
Yeah. Well, that's the beauty of your story,
Mm-hmm.
and I think everybody's stories have pages for a reason and chapters for a reason. Like they're all not 3 minutes or less or 90 seconds or less or an Instagram reel or less. Like there's a lot to it. So I'm curious for you, like first time you were called JackHammer, when was it? Or when did you identify with that title?
Who did it? Because I think it was it 2020? And it might have been, or it might have been 2019. It might have been Tristan Gebbia. And he just started calling it like JackHammer, and it just stuck for whatever reason. Then they started calling that the package. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. I could get behind that. And then it just stuck and it just became this thing. It was honestly insane. I don't know if like Tristan was the original guy to come up with it, but that was like my last or my first memory of that taking place.
That's cool, man. I'll never forget coming to call a game last year, and all of a sudden you're asking about packages and you're hearing about the jackhammer thing, and then now this year you come into the stadium and you see starting lineups come out, offense, da 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 da, defense, da 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 da, the jackhammer. Have you seen that?
I did see that. Yeah, that's my guy DVD at work right there, getting that all dialed in and squared away. But it's really neat that they're able to do that.
Yeah, I say that all because I do a lot with quarterbacks. See a lot of them coming out. I've seen every guy for probably the last 20 years that's highly ranked. They all don't make it. And it's a really challenging thing to separate from the identity. You said identity a few times now. Identity of what that position is. It seems, and that's why I want to ask it. It seems as though once you broke away from that, like you had way more fun. Like, was it one of those things where you just kind of left it in the river and just let it go? Like, I know you like boating and things like that. Like, you just kind of let it roll, or did you have to like deal with like, I'm no longer the guy?
Honestly, it just kind of felt like it just felt like a lot of weight came off my shoulders, and just the expectations of everything. And really, it was just honestly the expectations I just put on myself. Because I really truly believe that you really suffer through your own imagination. And I kind of created this perception of how I wanted it to look. And ultimately, when it doesn't look that way, it's like, okay, well, now what? But then when I was able to make the switch, it was just kind of my mindset was, okay, this is a clean slate. There's no expectations. I can just go out and play.
So, what would you say to quarterbacks that are kind of struggling right now?
My biggest advice is if when you come in here as a freshman in college, and the only thing you focus on developing and getting better at is football, you will have a miserable experience. If you leave the building after your 5th year or whenever you decide to leave as the same person you came in, your experience will not be enjoyable. You have to be able to not only expand your mind when it comes to football, but what comes along with that is expanding your mind as an individual. And I believe that window, when you leave your parents' house and you go into college and you're on your own, I believe that window, 18 to 22, 18 to 23, however long you're in college, that's your window to really truly solidify your identity and figure out who you really are as an individual. And I don't think a lot of people these days really truly understand who they are as an individual and what they truly value and what they truly want in their life. I just think that's the biggest transformation that I have made and realized. And I realized a little bit later, but I was able to realize that over the course of what I've had to go through.
Yeah. So, how have you changed, in your words?
I mean, Socially, I was very introverted because when I was divorced, I grew up with my mom. She's an introverted person. Granted, she supported me. I mean, I can't even like sit here and say all the ways she's been able to support me, or else we'd be here for 3 hours. But just growing up and seeing that, and also being with my brother, it's like we were the type, we kind of raised each other because she was always out, working, being a doctor. But when she was home, it's like she always provided and supported us. But just being around that, it just naturally made me a bit more of an introverted person and a shy person. And I've just always kind of been that way. But I kind of set that limit on myself. Like, and I think it was Tony Robbins when I listened to a video, and there's something that really clicked and resonated with me is everybody sets these limitations or sets these standards, I'd say, for who they are as an individual. And the next question he asks is, so when did you set that standard for yourself? When did you say that's who you were? Was it in middle school, elementary school? And so I sat there and I thought, I sat down and I thought about it. And I was like, I've set so many standards and expectations when I was in middle school. And now I'm here in college. And it's like, if I really want to get to where I'm at, is this the person that I should be? Or should I start to break those expectations and break those standards that I set back then and start to kind of figure out something new and be open to something new? Because I was always really stubborn, always wanted to run through the wall. And it's just kind of that whole process of opening up my mind to new ideas and new philosophies and new thoughts that created really my philosophy and what I believe in today.
So what's that philosophy?
Well, I do believe that the choices we make ultimately can decide where we go in our life, and that we have the power to create whatever we want. Although the process is very messy to be able to get there. It's never clean. And then also in regards to the ease and the effort and the balance between things that we've talked about, and being able to go with the flow and just being able to handle all that stuff and all that adversity, and just being able to sort myself out through those things, and being able to have perspective to see certain situations where if you look at something, you look at a bad play, to be able to see it for what it is, not worse than it is. Or you make a great play and it's never really as great as it is, but it's still a good play. And just kind of finding that balance in the middle between things. And there's really, life is all about finding the balance between two different things, and where you find yourself in the middle of it, whether you lean one way or the other way. I still believe you need to experience and understand both sides of situations and both sides of certain ideas.
What's your mom's name?
Chris.
Chris. She seems like she's instilled a great deal of curiosity in you. Is that fair to say? Or were you always just a curious young man growing up?
I think. Honestly, don't think I was really that curious until I started changing my mindset on things. I was really pretty stuck in my ways. You can ask her, because like I'd fight to the death on some things, and she's like, you know what? He's just got to learn the hard way. And she just let me go, and crash my bike, and then learn my lesson.
Learn the hard way.
Yeah.
What do you think about like the word identity? Because I think when people hear Jack Colletto, like, to be honest, like, we don't even say your full name anymore. It's JackHammer, right? Like you have this persona around you. I'm curious if you enjoy it. Like, clearly you embrace it. JackHammer, Colletto.com. Like, go to the website, get some swag. Ashley Adamson already has a sweet hat. She showed me it last night. It's awesome.
How about that?
How about that is right. But what I'm curious around, like how do you feel about identity? And then like what do people need to know? Like what do you hope goes in addition to Swiss Army knife?
Ultimately, the thing I want people to understand is that they're in control of whatever they want to do in their lives. And ultimately, there's no substitute for hard work. And that's the identity that ultimately I've had growing up in my entire life, and I got that through my father. And having that mindset towards how I approached my work, and then having the brand also kind of match that. That's something I do strongly believe in. But then at the same time, it's like more in depth, you know, of course I said finding the balance between stuff, but back to the logo, I just believe there's no substitute for hard work. And I believe that if you really want to get something done, you can do it. And it will take a great amount of perseverance, but it is possible.
I know you graduated with mechanical engineering, but do you ever think about philosophy?
It's so funny. Sometimes I look at that stuff on my own time and just kind of think about it. It's funny because my mom says, she's like, oh yeah, when I was younger, I used to look at all that stuff as well. I was like, oh, yeah, it's kind of neat.
Yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of times, like if we're going to be super general here, like you think of fullback, brute, think of you're tough, physical. You don't, the first thought doesn't come to mind like philosopher. Like you've got, and I've loved this dialogue because I'm getting to see the depth of who you are. Mm-hmm. I mean, I only have a couple left before I let you go, man. But what is it like when you're in the locker room and curating conversation?
It's funny because I'm always just try to be like the guy who's like friends with everybody and just kind of be involved in every different group. And obviously, yeah, I have close friends on the team and like everyone's casual, but usually I always try to end up talking to everybody on the team and being able to know everybody on the team. And so in terms of the conversations we have, I mean, some of it can be like life conversations. I don't know, like how I developed this, but I honestly love these kinds of conversations. Just talk about life and philosophies and what people have gone through and what people believe in and why they see the world they do today. And part of it's probably because that's kind of how I developed the mindset I have now, is being open to hearing what other people have gone through and what they have done to get to where they're at. And the deeper conversations is being able to have those conversations with teammates. But on a day-to-day basis, usually it's pretty just casual.
Okay. So I call this our final 5. So whatever comes to mind, hit me with your instant reaction. Right. Number 1, the best piece of advice you've ever received is what?
Gosh, man, that's a deep one. I mean, I have to say, what if it could turn out better than you could imagine it?
Worst advice you've ever received is what?
Worst advice you've ever received? Be careful. It's good advice, but it's also bad advice at the same time. Or have a plan B, I would say.
Amen to that. Number 3, more of a challenge. Mechanical engineering, learning multiple positions.
Mechanical engineering.
I'd have to agree. I've never stepped foot into a mechanical engineering class.
I mean, there's because the thing about football is it's all kind of, there's continuity within it. It's like if you understand one and the scheme, then you can kind of understand everything. But with engineering, it's like sometimes I walk into a class and it's like, of course, this is a concept that they bring up concepts I've learned before, and then it just elaborates into stuff and you just can't even wrap your head around it. I'm like, what is going on? I've had a few of those moments. Yeah.
This show is titled The It Factory. I think the phrase the it factor is one of the most overused, undefinable phrases in sport. But you know when you see it. You have it. How would you describe your own it factor?
I believe there's no substitute for experience. And ultimately, the process is messy, but it's the people who are willing to go through the messy process and sort things out in a way that's not necessarily easy, but it's the right way to do it. I believe that's what creates the best players and really the most successful people in life. I don't believe it's the people with the straightforward path. And granted, you do have some people like that who can just, they've always been successful since a kid, and it just transcends to wherever they want to go in life. But I think the majority of the time, It's the people who have to sort things out and go through a messy process and come out on the other end of it. Those are the people who ultimately, I believe, achieve the highest level of success.
So throughout our time together, we've heard a lot from you, right? Inspiration of your family, your football life, how you view the world and your path. So I'd like you to complete the following sentence. Among all your experiences, it all comes down to what?
Perseverance. I think that's what it all boils down to.
Yeah, well, you've done that and much, much more, man. Jack Colletto, it's been 2 years. We were waiting for you. You finally came on. Big shout out to your staff, Sean Scheffler and company. Thank you for the time, the insight, for going there. And I hope we got to take the helmet off and dive into the makeup and the soul of Jack Colletto versus just the talented player, man.
Great. I mean, great conversation, man. I really appreciate doing this with you and continuing to grow our relationship, and see you at some games and some JackHammer apparel, man.
That's what I'm talking about. I hope to see you soon at a game, at a sweet bowl game, and many more times in our lives. We'll stay connected. Philosophical conversations will be many. But in the meantime, stay safe, keep an eye on the Beavs, and enjoy the final few games that you get in Leicester Stadium, man. Thanks again.
Great. Appreciate it, Yogi.
You got it. There it is. Jack Colletto. Man, if you're not inspired by that, if you're not taking something from that to your daily life, then listen again, because it was amazing. Thanks for the time. You know where to find us, pack-12.com/insider. We premiere every Tuesday night, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Just type in The It Factory, Yogi Roth, Jack Colletto. This one will pop right up. Take a listen, give it a rating, share it with a friend, and most importantly, enjoy college football, because the season is almost over. Peace.